Welcome everyone. Great to have you join us on this episode of Wisdom Wednesdays. My name is Lamar Toulouse. I'll be serving as your personal encourager today. My aim is to provide you with kingdom principles that you can apply now and win in every area of life. Today we're going to talk about a topic that may have caused you some pain in the past, or it may be causing you some pain now. Or you may be on the verge of it causing you some pain. And I want to also talk about the number one cause of this pain, how to recognize its effects, and what you can do to regain focus and win in that area. To dive into this today, I want to use the story of the children of Israel to make this point. God was bringing them out of bondage, and if you're familiar with the story passage, the children of Israel were in bondage in Egypt, being oppressed by the taskmaster or the Pharaoh of that land. And God was going to bring them out. He chose them as a people, and he was going to bring them out of their bondage because he heard their cry to be released, and he sent prophet Moses to let them go. But you have an issue here. They're coming out of bondage, and he promised them a land. This land flowed like milk and honey. It was an abundance. It was more than enough. It was God's best for them. So look at the picture here. God is bringing them out of their bondage through the wilderness and to a place of abundance, or the best that he had for them. But the issue that they have is, in order to get to what he has best for them, they had to pass through the wilderness. So he promised them a land that represented his best, but they had to get through a place that represented a dry area, a dry time, where it wasn't meant for them to dwell there. It was meant for them to pass through. They're coming from something, but have to go through something to get to something. But they never made it to the promised land because they settled for the wilderness. Today I want to talk to you from that topic. What are you settling for? Are you settling for less than God's best? Come on, let's say that one more time. Are you settling for less than God's best? What have you settled for in life that you know it was not God's best for you? What have you settled it for in life that you know it was not God's best for you? Are you settling for safe when God is trying to bring you to success? Are you settling for poverty when God is trying to bring you to prosperity? Are you settling for a job when God is trying to bring you to business? Are you settling for good enough when God is trying to bring you to more than enough? And through settling, a lot of times we develop an issue. And that issue is the number one thing that I want to talk about that causes the settling. And I'm speaking from the story of the children of Israel, and we're going to watch out as they make this decision in their wilderness. Remember, they're coming out of bondage. God is going to bring them to his best for them, but they have to pass through the wilderness area. And in passing through this wilderness area, one thing that has caused them to settle is unbelief. Unbelief. Hebrews 3:19 says it this way. So we see that they could not enter into the promised land because of unbelief, because of uncertainty, because of their distrust and unfaithfulness. You know, we kind of get into a place of doubt and unbelief when there's uncertainty. Because see, they knew what they were getting in Egypt. They knew what they were facing in Egypt. They knew, even though it was bondage, they knew what to expect. But now they get to a wilderness area, which is just a pass through to get to the promised land. Because we have to remember, in the beginning, before they left Egypt, God promised them the land that he was taking them to. So they can expect from him what he promised. But now they're in the wilderness where it's just a pass through and not getting the things that they felt they needed. But watch this, what's happening to them. Because of the unbelief, they settled for the wilderness. They looked at it this way: if we can't have what we came from and where we're going is uncertain, then I'm willing to settle here and die in the wilderness. I'm coming to encourage you today not to die in your uncertainty, not to die in the place that you are, not realizing that you have settled for where you are because you're not willing to do something to move yourself forward. So watch this. Through unbelief that leads to settling, it gives birth to these three things that I'm going to share with you right now. Unbelief leads to settling, which gives birth to these three things that I'm going to share with you right now. Number one is resentment. They came out of Egypt familiar, but it was bondage. And the bondage was tough to deal with. But now they're in a place of uncertainty, and they are willing to go back to the bondage because they're not aware of their future. So in the settling, they have given birth to resentment. You know, when you resent something, it builds on the inside a bitterness. They asked the question, God, Moses, Aaron, have y'all brought us into the wilderness just to die? I mean, you said you was bringing us to the promised land, but now we're here in the wilderness and we don't have food to eat, or we don't have water to drink, or we don't have the resources that we need to live. So why don't we go back to Egypt? Or must we stay here and die? You know, that's how we are in life sometimes when it gets hard, when it gets tough. When, you know, a lot of people that are on their jobs are on jobs that they don't even like going to. That you're reporting to a job. It feels like sometimes you're reporting to jail, like you're reporting to lockup, like you're reporting to prison to do your time. Have you just been existing in that area and just doing time for it to get by? I think I'm preaching to the choir sometimes. But God has a purpose and a plan for us that's greater than where we are if you know that it's not God's best for you. But you have to be careful, because you will develop this resentment on the inside. And you will resent God, as the children of Israel did in the wilderness. And this makes me think of the scripture passage in Matthew 6:24 that says, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, the scripture passage is saying in this instance. What it's saying is, you can't give yourself to two masters. You can't give your trust to two masters. You're either going to depend on the one and hate the other. You're going to despise the one or hold to the other. When I think of that word despise there, I automatically think of resentment. You know an area in your life that you begin to resent God? Have you ever had a situation where you prayed a prayer and God didn't come through like you wanted him to come through? You asked God for something and he didn't give you the thing as you requested it? And we build on the inside a resentment, a bitterness. And if we allow that resentment to stir and become a cancer on the inside and destroys us internally, never allowing us to fulfill our external goal and gift that God has called us to. Be careful, because in the wilderness you can give birth to resentment. Number two that I want to talk about that the children of Israel gave birth to in their settling was complaining. You know, they didn't have food after 3 days' journey, and they looked to Moses, and Moses asked Moses the question, Moses, have you brought us in the wilderness to die? Have you brought us here to just destroy us? We could have stayed in Egypt, because I remember in my past when I had food to eat that was more than enough. But it wasn't God's best for them. But when you're not looking forward to God's best, you will always keep your eyes in the past to what you used to have. Even though it may be what you lost, you still remember having it. And now you're complaining and looking back to what was, because we can't see what's ahead. And I find myself in between, complaining, being dissatisfied, wanting something to change, but not willing to do nothing about it. Wanting something to change, but not willing to believe for it to change. Wanting something to change, but not change. So we complain. You know, a lot of times when we complain, what we're really saying is somebody needs to do something about this. Well, my question is, why don't that somebody be you? Are you going to sit back and wait for someone else to fix what you can fix for yourself? Or are you going to get about your business and not die and settle for the wilderness? Number one that you give birth to through settling is resentment. Number two, you give birth to complaining. And last, number three, we give birth to regret. You know, you don't want to go through life regretting that you never took the opportunity that was presented before you. When you only get this one life to live on this side of heaven. What are you going to do with the one life that God has given you? Are you going to take what God has put on the inside of you and take it to the grave, never allowing it to flourish and become all that God has put in you to become? There's books on the inside of you. There's movies on the inside of you. There's sermons on the inside of you. There's businesses on the inside of you. But you have in you the ability for those to come to light. But you have to make the decision, am I going to settle for where I am because where I'm trying to go is uncertain, that's bringing fear on me? Or am I going to move forward, advise a plan through God's instruction, and get myself into God's best that He has for me? Do not die regretting that I never started something that God gave me to start. Oh, I think I'm once again can speak to myself on that accord. A lot of times, death would bring this to light for us. When a loved one dies, or when a friend or a family member dies, we always reflect on how short life is. And it gives us a pushing and an urgency that I need to do something now, because I'm not where I should be, or I'm not where I want to be at this point in my life. But I also wanted to ask you the question, if you can really take a good inventory and ask yourself, have I really put forth the effort to move myself forward? Or am I still in the thinking position where I'm dreaming this, but I never wake up from the dream? We experience that a lot of times, that we never wake up from the dream, and then we end up regretting that we didn't start that thing, or we didn't do that thing, and now this regret leads to complaining, that leads to resentment. And you don't want to die in the wilderness with a hardened heart, resenting God for trying to get you somewhere that your faith couldn't get you to. There's nothing wrong with God. There's nothing wrong with what He promised. A lot of times it's our belief that is hindering us from grabbing hold to what God has made available to us. So instead of grab hold to what God has said and put our trust in Him, we become distrust or unbelief, and we die giving birth into the wilderness to feelings that is never beneficial for us. But that's the good news that I have, because all three of these are feelings that you can change. And feelings don't stop faith. I believe I should say that one again. Feelings will not stop faith. Sometimes you have to press through it even when you don't feel like. Sometimes you have to push yourself through instead of settling when you don't feel like. Sometimes you have to pull yourself up from the muck and miry clay when you don't feel like. And what will be that pulling for you? Your faith will tug you to places that you never imagined yourself going. He promised them the promised land. He assured them that I'm bringing you to this place. But it was their unbelief that caused them to give birth in the wilderness to those three things that I just shared with you: resentment, complaining, and regret. And they died in the wilderness, never receiving the promise. Listen to me closely. A journey that wasn't supposed to be very long ended up being 40 years. And 40 years they settled for what God didn't originally intend for them. I ask yourself the same question that we asked in the beginning. Reflect with me. What have you settled for in life that you know was not God's best for you? What are you settling for right now that you know is not God's best for you? Like I said, the good news is those three that you gave birth to are feelings that you can change. So now let's wrap this up with this. What to do now to change and win in this area? What to do now to change where you are and what you settle so you can win in this area? To wrap this up, I want to give us 3 start and stops. We're going to share 3 start and stops. Number 1, stop looking at your past and start looking at your future. Number 1, stop looking at your past and start looking at your future. To do this, we have to reset focus. You know, when things get blurry, when things get out of focus, and you go through searching and seeking and bumping into this and bumping into that, walking in darkness. But the light is come to illuminate you, to shake you out of it and say it's time to refocus. You've been looking at the past long enough. You've been looking at what was long enough. Watch this. You've been looking at your mistake that you made in the past long enough. But like they say, it is a mistake. It is not the end of the world for you. It was a mistake. It's time for you to get back in the saddle and say action once again and get yourself back in the game. Stop looking at the past and start looking at the future. Stop looking at the bondage that you came out of and settling for where you are and calling it your new norm when it's not your new norm, because it's not God's best for you. And start looking at the past. I believe the writer would say it this way, Paul. He says, I forget those things that are behind me. I'm not even looking back to what was. I'm not even considering what was. And I look toward the mark. I press toward the mark. Who is that mark? That mark is Jesus Christ, but he is God the Father, the promise. Jesus being the promised seed. I press towards the promise. What I visualize as my expected end keeps me motivated to keep moving. I'm not going to die in the wilderness. The first start and stop, or stop and start, is stop looking at your past. Start looking at your future. It's time for you to refocus. And watch this. You may get the opportunity to settle, but just don't take it. You may get the opportunity to settle. The opportunity to settle may come very often, but just don't take it. Come on, you say with me. I'm not going to take or settle for the opportunity. I'm only going to look to the best that God has for me. Hallelujah. Number 2, stop looking at yourself as not able and start looking to God, who is more than able. Stop looking at yourself as not able and start looking to God, who is more than able. What I mean by that? When we renew our minds, we are transformed in the image of his dear son. So what that is telling me is I have to get the thought process that's going to take me to the promised land that I'm seeking. So my thoughts have to be in alignment for where I'm going. My thoughts can't be in alignment with my past, and my thoughts can't be in alignment with where I am, if it's the wilderness that you're settling in. But my thought process has to be where I'm going. Watch an example of this. I'm believing for the businesses that I am planning to pursue. So my thought process has to be what those businesses will look like. And now I scale back and develop a plan to get myself from point A to point B to the end of those businesses. It's the whole framework of these Wisdom Wednesdays. My aim is to provide you kingdom principles so you can win in every area of life. As you come to the benchmarks of life, these kingdom principles are helping establish you and push you forward, not to give up. So when you get in the wilderness, you will realize, hey, I don't want to get into resentment, into complaining. I don't want to get into regret, because those are feelings that I can give birth to when I'm settling for something that's not God's best. So now I push myself out of that by rethinking. What am I doing when I'm rethinking? In running a real estate company, we used to renovate houses. We would go in and take houses that are destroyed, that have been left to the side, need more than a little TLC a lot of time, needed complete renovations. But watch this. The first thing that we did once purchasing the home was go in and gut out everything, to the bare walls, to the bare stud, get the carpet out, get the flooring out, get the walls out, tear the sheetrock out, tear the old cabinetry out. All the old things, all the past had to go, so we can put in the new material, the new carpet, the new flooring, the new appliances, the new paint, the new sheetrock, all of these things. So take that same analogy and realize I'm not going to get new thinking in until I get the old thinking out. How do I get the old thinking out? I have to put new thinking in. You have to surround yourself with people that are going to challenge you to think higher than where you are. If you're around people who are not challenging you to think on a level of where you're trying to go, then you're going to end up right where you're at. And then you end up in resentment, complaining, and regret. And you don't want to end up there. And last but not least, the last of the three of the stop and starts. Stop saying what you can't do and start saying what you will do. Notice I didn't just say what you can do. I said what you will do. That's an action term. That is movement. That is putting feet to the faith. That is getting action to your steps. Not just being a hearer only, but a doer of the word. That means that if I get a promise that I'm getting to an expected end, then I have to put faith to that to believe that I am going to get there. I'm not going to just say I can, but I'm going to say I must. I will. Stop saying what you can't do. Start saying what you will do. Watch this. I will not settle. I will overcome. I will succeed. I will win in this area of my life. I won't let resentment creep in to my heart. I won't let complaining steal my life. I won't let regret be my obituary. I won't let the wilderness steal my joy. I will succeed. I will overcome. I will not settle. Come on, say it with me as we close out. I will succeed. I will overcome. I will not settle. Now, don't be afraid to say it. Don't stop right there. Come on, you got to say that one with me one more time. I will not settle. I hope you got that out. I'm proud of you. I appreciate you going through this lesson with us on this Wisdom Wednesdays. Be encouraged. Take these principles to heart so you can win in every area. Beloved, I wish above all things that you would be in health and prosper, even as your soul prosper. Let's say that right. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou may prosper and be in health, even as your soul prosper. I'm Lamar Toulouse, personally here to encourage you with kingdom principles that can change your life. Tune in to next week's episode. God bless you. Thank you.